Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. Sorry about last night's show, folks. I was ill. I had eaten something that disagreed with me, and I stopped the show quickly because I didn't want to cat up on air. I'm still a little weak, but feeling much better than yesterday. Let's talk about the Supreme Court of the United States. So what had we been told yesterday? That Trump was going to get a vote on his replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg before the election. But I just saw this on the Daily Telegraph. Mitch McConnell won't promise Donald Trump a vote on a Supreme Court pick before the election, as Mitt Romney joins Republican senators in moving forward with the president's nomination. When the nomination comes out of committee, then I'll decide when and how to proceed, McConnell said. Trump said that he will announce his nominee to the Supreme Court on Saturday at the White House. Timing would be tough with less than 40 days for the nominee to meet with senators, have a confirmation hearing, and then a floor vote. Trump has had enough Republican support to get his pick confirmed this year. I don't really think the Republicans are going to let the Democrats get away with what they did with Kavanaugh. Yeah, we're just going to, we're going to have a little conspiracy here. And we're going to find some woman who's going to say all these crazy things that happened decades ago and say it in a crazy voice. And she immediately becomes Christine Blasey or Blasey Ford. Oh, she just becomes universally beloved. And then she seemingly disappears off the face of the earth. I guess she had done what was expected of her. An article here from the Washington Post. Democrats are largely powerless to stop GOP from confirming court choice, by Paul Kane and Rachel Bade. Deep into their sixth year in the minority, Democrats can use some procedural tactics that might briefly slow the confirmation process. But if at least 50 Republicans approve of Trump's pick to replace the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that nominee is certain to be seated. So what are the Democrats talking about? They're talking about packing the court. Yeah, let's bring that up to 15 or so. This is dependent upon them winning the election and taking the Senate, I suppose. They're also talking about forcing statehood for Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. Puerto Rico should have been given its independence decades ago. I don't know. Do the people of Puerto Rico really want statehood? Because they're a commonwealth now, they don't pay American taxes, federal taxes, which sounds like a pretty good deal. Of course, so many of them have come to the United States in the last few decades that it's not a pretty picture of what's left. This from Politico. Mitt Romney said Tuesday he would support a floor vote to replace the late Justice RBG, essentially clinching consideration of Trump's nominee this year despite the impending election. Just two Republican senators have asked for the party to put the brakes on the confirmation, and with a 53-seat majority, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell now has the votes he needs, but I don't know. He doesn't seem to be in any kind of hurry. Here's a story from The Hill. Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, who is facing a tough re-election bid, said on Tuesday that she will vote against a Supreme Court nominee if one is brought to the Senate floor before the November election. My statement was a model of clarity. I made it very clear, yes, that I did not think that there should be a vote prior to the election. Collins added that her decision was based not on the nominee, but on the proximity to the election and the decision by Republicans in 2016 to refuse to move forward with Merrick Garland, then President Obama's Supreme Court nominee. If there is a vote, I would oppose the nominee, not because I might not support that nominee under normal circumstances, but we're simply too close to the election, and in the interest of being fair to the American people and consistent, since it was with the Garland nomination that the decision was made not to proceed, a decision I disagreed with, but my position did not prevail. I now think we need to play by the same set of rules. Now, this is typical old-fashioned Republican playbook of playing to lose. The behavior of the Democrats with regard to Kavanaugh was so outrageous that it's ridiculous for any Republicans to think that they're going to get anything reasonable from the Democrats. So who is Trump's choice going to be? Well, we heard this name before. And this woman, Amy Coney Barrett, was not, in fact, chosen, but maybe this is her turn. Barrett met with Trump and separately with White House counsel Pat Cipollone on Monday, said people familiar with the discussions. She is a favorite of anti-abortion rights advocates who were heavily lobbying the White House and Trump personally to nominate her. She's preferred by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, according to people close to him. And her supporters have pointed out to the White House that as a Midwestern Catholic, Barrett may help the president secure votes for his reelection in vital Rust Belt and Great Lakes states, where he currently trails Democratic candidate Joe Biden. Trump told an audience in Dayton, Ohio Monday that he'll pick a woman. Earlier, he told reporters at the White House that he's looking at 5 women to fill the vacancy, but has 1 or 2 of them in mind as finalists. The president said Barrett is among those under consideration. Within the White House, the only candidate for Ginsburg's seat currently attracting serious interest other than Barrett is appeals court judge Barbara Lagoa. She is a Cuban-American from Florida, as Trump has repeatedly noted, which might help him win in that must-win state. But Lagoa is at the moment a distant second to Barrett, a judge on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals based on Chicago. The president has expressed some skepticism about her conservative credentials because Lagoa drew the votes of 27 Democrats when she was confirmed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. So here's an article from the Catholic magazine Crooks from 2017. Among the newly announced federal judges selected by President Trump is a Catholic law professor who once co-wrote a law review article on Catholic judges sitting over death penalty cases. Catholic judges must answer some complex moral and legal questions in deciding whether to sit in death penalty cases. She wrote, then of Notre Dame Law School, wrote in an article published in the Marquette Law Review in 1998. Barrett clerked for the late Justice Antonin Scalia and teaches law at the University of Notre Dame. She has twice been honored as Distinguished Professor of the Year. In 2015, ahead of the Ordinary Synod on the Family, she signed a letter to Synod fathers from Catholic women that upheld church teaching on marriage, family, and the human person and decried ideological colonization. We see the teachings of the church as truth, a source of authentic freedom, equality, and happiness for women, the letter stated. We stand in solidarity with our sisters in the developing world, don't like that phrase, against what Pope Francis has described as forms of ideological colonization which are out to destroy the family and which exalt the pursuit of success, riches, and power at all costs. Now, this is very odd to me because, of course, it was John Paul II who reversed, hundreds, a couple of thousand years of Catholic teaching on the death penalty. And so this is heresy, actually. Another concern with this judge is that she has adopted 2 children from Haiti, which rather suggests that she's going to be squishy on immigration issues, although this might just be a personal thing with her. So some funny columns here from Steve Saylor on the notorious RBG. According to the New York Times, RBG liked Black so long as they preferred Glenn Gould's version of Bach's Goldberg variations rather than inferior renditions. And a piece, My Unlikely Friendship with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. This is from Eric Motley, Executive VP of the Aspen Institute. I was a young African-American Southerner working in a Republican administration, but I loved Bach's Goldberg variations, and that was enough for her. Yeah, all right. So what do you do when you're not working at the White House? Her husband, Marty Ginsburg, asked. I replied that listening to music and reading were my chief interests. He turned and said, my wife and I love music. What are you listening to now? When he learned that I was researching different renditions of Bach's Goldberg variations, he asked for my favorite. Without hesitation, I replied, Glenn Gould, 1955. Addressing his wife on the other side of the table, he said, Ruth, you have to meet Eric. We continued to discuss music and many other interests for the next 17 years. She sent me CDs and articles, and sometimes over dinner would explain complicated legal questions. She also shared her recollections that helped me understand the roots of her lifelong passion for equal opportunity for every person. Once we talked about people who had made lasting impressions on us when we were young. She recalled being mesmerized by the conductor of a children's concert she attended in Brooklyn in 1944 when she was 11. She was both sad and incredulous to learn that I had not heard of the African-American conductor and his inability to land a conductor's job at a major symphony orchestra simply because of his race. Steve Saylor comments, that's a pretty funny story that says a lot about how high IQ Jewish liberals like RBG tend to project about blacks, as symphony conductors denied the opportunity to make it on their inborn talent and chutzpah by the WASP establishment. They probably even had to found their own country clubs or something. Glenn Gould. When I was a young man, I thought the world of him, and then I greatly tired of him over the decades. I don't like his records. I start with the way that they're recorded. He very much preferred close miking techniques such that his records tend to sound as if they were recorded in a cardboard box. I also don't like his interpretations of Bach. And who would I prefer? Oh, Alfred Brendel, Wilhelm Kempff. There's a couple of names. But of course, Glenn Gould was, more than a pianist. He was a celebrity, a star. But it turns out that Ruth Bader Ginsburg wasn't particularly fond of hiring black people. Yeah, who would have thunk it? Would it 1 out of 108 in 40 years? Sorry, one black out of about 150 hires over her 40 years as a judge. Let's see. Robert Conquest's first law is everyone is conservative about what he knows best. Robert Conquest being the English historian, poet, and essayist. This probably best explains the dichotomy between RBG's ruthless race realism in hiring her own law clerks versus her dissent in the famous Ricci case, that if on the firefighter's promotion tests blacks don't score well, that is prima facie evidence of disparate impact discrimination, since apparently everybody knows there's no point in requiring fire captains to be book smart about fighting fires. They just have to be strong and brave and have command presence. In 2009's Ricci reverse racism case, in which fireman Frank Ricci sued New Haven's mayor for tearing up results of the fire department promotion exam because the top scores were earned by 13 whites, 2 Latinos, and 0 blacks, RBG's dissent said ratio was prima facie evidence of discrimination. Ironically, RBG didn't seem to think that the logic of the 1972 Griggs disparate impact discrimination ruling or her dissent in Ricci applied to her personally. Yes, good enough for everyone else, but not for her. And, oh yes, apparently Ruth Bader Ginsburg is speaking to us from beyond the grave. Woo! That it was her dying wish that a replacement for her not be chosen before the election. So apparently the people get a say. Well, the people do get a say through their senators. That is how the system works. And of course, senators are directly elected and have been for over 100 years. According to Mediaite, Tucker Carlson sneered at RBG's dying wish that the 2020 election should decide who will be the president and who will nominate her replacement on the Supreme Court. On Monday night, Carlson mocked what he called the hysteria and rage from progressive Democrats over Ginsburg's death and the possibility that President Donald Trump and his Republican allies will replace her before the election is finished. Carlson then mocked Democrats for heeding the last wish Ginsburg offered to her granddaughter and reported by NPR that, quote, "I will not be replaced until a new president is installed." Sounds rather imperious, does it not? Nothing is more important than our Constitution. That Constitution is in grave jeopardy. That's why we must substitute an 87-year-old woman's final wish for the constitutionally prescribed process for filling Supreme Court seats, Carlson scoffed. Pretty amusing. Keep in mind, we don't really know actually what Ruth Bader Ginsburg's final words were. Did she really leave this world fretting about the presidential election? We don't believe that for a second. If it were true, it would be pathetic, because life is bigger than politics, even this year. Well, that's a bold statement, that life is bigger than politics, because in 2020, it appears there's only politics. Remember science? Yeah, well, there's good science and there's bad science, depending on, how much freedom you're going to allow people to have. Nancy Pelosi says we can impeach Trump every day of the week for anything he does. I don't know whether you saw the clip of her last week, and I don't know, she had an earpiece in or whatever, and she answers a question, and then there's another question, and she pauses and she says, "Good morning." No, the interview's already started. Yes, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi told Kara Swisher of the New York Times in an interview released Monday that the House of Representatives can impeach President Donald Trump every day of the week for anything he does. Does that sound a very responsible kind of language? Again, Trump is supposed to be the bullying one, but he knows what the Democrats are up to. The Constitution does not say a president can be impeached for anything. This is from Joel Pollack at Breitbart. Rather, it says, quote, "The president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors." Here's Miss Reasonable Nancy Pelosi on Attorney General Bill Barr. Quote, "Bill Barr is a complete henchman. He's a disgrace to the office he holds. He shouldn't even be a lawyer. He should be disbarred. We've held him in contempt of Congress, but he is an employee, and the villain here is Donald Trump. And that is what we have to do to make sure that he is not elected." Yeah, how about let the voters decide? Oh, Joe Biden announces Cindy McCain is endorsing him. What about the daughter? Has she endorsed Biden yet? Oh, and this is pretty funny from Mediaite. Trump DOJ threatening to cut funding to anarchist destination New York City draws mockery. Bill Barr defends the NYPD. Yeah, let's see these straw man arguments here. From Bob Al Green, feels good to live in an anarchist jurisdiction. Might go get a sandwich later. Megan Carpenter says, "I still can't get a glass of effing wine without buying food. Restaurants have to be cleared out by 11, and the cops are actively policing both, but this is an anarchist jurisdiction. GTFO, we're Utah 20 years ago." Don Moynihan, throughout the summer, many parts of the criminal justice system have overreacted to protest by charging protesters with felonies. Yeah, for what? Throwing Molotov cocktails at a police car? The DOJ is threatening to cut federal funds from cities who are not more aggressive. Oh dear, oh dear. And he added, just to note, A, the impeachment process was a chance to make clear the president cannot control resources like a king, but the Senate let him break the law. B, taking money from anarchist, read liberal cities is a hell of a thing when white supremacy is our main terror threat. Joanne Freeman, New York City isn't in a state of anarchy, but that's not the point. Outlawing and punishing opposition to the administration and civil protest. That's the point. It's just protest. It's just peaceful protest. And now someone called Jamal Igle. New York City is such an anarchist paradise that I was able to walk and jog 6 miles unmolested before sitting down with my iced coffee and a homemade banana chocolate chip muffin my daughter made. You notice it always comes back to food with these people. Again, from Breitbart, Joe Biden says, I'm not going to answer on whether I would add SCOTUS seats, that is to say, pack the court. He was asked if Trump's Supreme Court pick goes through, but you win the election, and let's say the Democrats then take over the Senate but maintain the House, would you consider adding more Supreme Court justices to the bench? He responded, it's a legitimate question, but let me tell you why I'm not going to answer that question, because it will shift the focus. That's what he wants. He never wants to talk about the issue at hand. He always tries to change the subject. Let's say I answer that question, then the whole debate's going to be what Biden said or didn't say. Biden said he would or wouldn't. Yeah, you wouldn't want people to know your opinion on that. It'll be revealed in good time. Of course, I read this crazy story on Blind Gossip today about what Democrats are getting ready for Biden's death, or simply him being shoved out of the way because of mental incompetence. It's just absolutely incredible that Kamala Harris is going to become president, of course, if she wins the election. And then a vice president will be chosen for her. That's the story that's going around. But I'll have a little more to say about Joe Biden in just a minute. Let's look at the chat here. Matt Beck says, glad you're back and doing all right. Why, thank you. Debrea says, hello. I thought AOC was the funniest. No, Joe is the most talented comedian. William Hicks says, Republicans have to act. No question. They'd be idiots not to. It's payback time. William Hicks, I recall the Clinton impeachment after the treatment of Bork, Packwood, and Thomas. The Republicans had to do it. This is similar. The Democrats deserve what they get. Yes, I remember that creep, Teddy Kennedy, practically reducing Robert Bork to tears because he kept asking him why he didn't donate more to charity in certain tax years. What Bork did not want to say was that his first wife was dying and he was spending all his spare money on medical treatment for her. I also remember when Rehnquist was being appointed Chief Justice, him being asked about stuff that he'd done in 1964 when he was working for Barry Goldwater in the presidential election, as if that has anything to do with it. Neil Terry says, Barrett has obvious faults, but almost anyone will be an improvement. Well, the great fear, of course, is another John Roberts. Oh, John Roberts, conservative Catholic, and it turns out that he's not conservative at all. Not at all. Metal Mike. Hello, Mike. Okay. Oh, today is battery day. Tesla says its new 80 millimeter cell has 5 times the energy, 16 times more range, and 6 times the power. And Neil Terry says the Supreme Court double standard show has gone on my whole life. What was it? Kagan? What did she get? 93, 95 votes? She's certainly not qualified. I was like, you ever see pictures of her when she's with her fellow Supreme Court justices? She's got this look on her face that says, golly, I'm just so glad to be here. Look at these famous judges, and I'm here too. Okay, let's talk about Joe Biden and just the absolute scandal of him running for the presidency. Appearing in a mask. Okay, Joe Biden wears masks for remote interview. Again, from Joel Pollack. Former Joe Biden wore a mask for a remote interview with a local Wisconsin ABC affiliate on Monday for reasons that remain unclear. The mask is meant to prevent transmission of coronavirus to other people within a close radius, but Biden and reporter Brittany Schmidt from Green Bay's WBAY appeared not to be in the same room. Schmidt was maskless. This interview appeared to be carried over Zoom or a similar remote conferencing technology. Pollock had tweeted, Joe Biden says he's the candidate of science, but he wore a mask for a Zoom interview today. Biden was speaking from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, after touring the Wisconsin aluminum foundry and delivering a speech attacking President Donald Trump. The speech itself had been socially distant, with no one in attendance other than the press, who were required to sit within circles marked on the floor. Biden wore a mask for that too. Though Biden has said he would, if elected president, let science guide his response to the coronavirus pandemic, there is no science that suggests a risk of transmitting coronavirus over the internet. Symbolism rather than science appeared to guide Biden's use of the mask as a prop as he attacked Trump, suggesting that the president was placing his own supporters in mortal danger at campaign rallies. My own opinion is that wearing a mask looks weak and not wearing a mask looks strong. It's pretty straightforward to me. This is from R.J. McCready. Biden just did an interview with Telemundo where he was asked questions, turned to the left, and read the answers off a teleprompter. Now, I guess I've seen the media in the tank for politicians before, but is Biden really going to be able to get away with not answering any questions, with reading off to teleprompters constantly? Biden legit reads the answer, looking to the left, then turns right to face a follow-up question. He then turns his head left again to read the answer, which he botches. And yes, I'm looking at a picture of this interview with these stupid circles on the floor. This story about Joe Biden and his first and second wives was one that I missed at the time, but it seems to be coming back with a vengeance. From the New York Post, Joe Biden's ex-husband accuses her of affair with Joe in the 1970s. He says they lied about how they met. Bill Stevenson on Monday accused the presumptive Democratic nominee of being a homewrecker and says the feel-good story about how Joe and Jill met on a blind date is completely made up, the Daily Mail reported. I don't want to hurt anyone, Stevenson, now 72, said, but facts are facts, and what happened, happened. Stevenson and his then-wife grew close to Biden in 1972 while working on his first campaign to represent Delaware in the U.S. Senate. That same year, tragedy struck when Biden's first wife, Nelia, and infant daughter were killed in a car crash. Stevens said that he first suspected an affair in 1974 when his wife passed on meeting an up-and-coming rock star who was set to play at his Delaware club. I know exactly when it was. Bruce Springsteen was going to play at the Stone Balloon, and I had to go to northern New Jersey to pay him in advance. I asked Jill to go with me, and she said no. She had things to do. She had to look after Joe's kids, Bo and Hunter. It was kind of a big deal to go meet Springsteen, he continued. I had no idea she and Joe were that kind of friendly. Then one of my best friends told me she thought Joe and Jill were getting a little too close. I was surprised she came to me. A couple months later, Stevens got all the evidence he needed when he was told that his wife had been an fender bender in her car while Biden was behind the wheel. I was at work and a guy came in and asked, "Do you own a brown Corvette?" He said back in May that it crunched his bumper and they told him to get an estimate and he never heard back from them. I said, "Wait a minute, who is they?" And he said, funnily enough, Senator Biden was driving. I considered Joe a friend. I'm not surprised he fell in love with Jill. Dr. Jill to you, Mr. Stevenson. Everyone who meets Jill falls in love with her immediately. It's hard not to. The Bidens, who have been married since 1977, have publicly said they met on a blind date in 1975 after Joe became a widower and Jill's first marriage had broken up. He's also, the ex-husband is also claiming that the story that Joe Biden told about the death of his wife and daughter is false because it was not the other driver who was responsible. But Joe Biden's wife, and there is a suggestion there that she had taken to drink after learning about a fair. No, look, certain things that should be required of a presidential candidate. For example, not giving the impression you're going to stroke off at any moment. Being able to, read off cards without making errors, or, knowing where you are, what state it is, the correct pronouns for you and for your wife. But no, he doesn't do any of those things. And we're not going to show you what this press conference actually looks like, that there's no audience. No, we're not going to show you because, that would make Joe look bad. A couple more stories about Joe Biden. This one's from Town Hall. Flashback: Biden lied for years about the driver involved in his wife and daughter's deaths. Curtis Dunn was driving the tractor trailer that collided with the car driven by Biden's first wife, Nelia. She was carrying their 13-month-old infant daughter with her, and young sons Beau and Hunter were in the car too. They were on their way to buy a Christmas tree when the accident occurred. Police at the time made the determination that Mrs. Biden drove into the path of the oncoming truck, possibly because she was looking the wrong way at a stop sign. Nelia and the girl died of their injuries despite Dunn's attempts to provide first aid, and the Biden sons were also hurt very badly. Politico wrote in January of this year that friends of Biden's looked into the accident at the time and concluded she had a stop sign. The truck driver did not. Everything's political now. As I said earlier, let's talk about Boris Johnson, who has gone completely nuts. From the Mail, Boris Johnson hits reverse. PM will order pubs and restaurants to close at 10 p.m. Tells workers stay home if you can, and demanded police crack down hard on rule breakers in TV speech today. The PM will drop back to work drive, restrict socializing, and impose a 10 p.m. curfew on bars and restaurants. Pubs and other venues will only be allowed to serve seated customers in draconian measures. Businesses and schools will be allowed to stay open while coronavirus restrictions have divided the cabinet. And this is the story that mentions the military. Let's get the military involved, some people are saying, amazingly. Let's just bring in a police state. Health Secretary Matt Hancock warned COVID transmission tends to be in social settings. People coming around to your house, are you going out in socializing? The limit on guests at wedding may also be slashed from the current limit of 30. Boris Johnson is supposed to be a conservative. Boris Johnson is supposed to, believe in liberty, freedom, and things like that. He seems to worry about nothing more now than losing his job. James Delingpole writes in Breitbart, Boris goes full fascist against lockdown protests, but not BLM or Extinction Rebellion. Here's some footage of the Metropolitan Police charging into action against demonstrators in London's Trafalgar Square. The police are spoiling for a fight with peaceful protesters when they take the knee for BLM. Decent society is under attack from all quarters. How much braver, more confident, more aggressive they look than the hapless colleagues caught on camera in June, fleeing from a BLM demonstration pursued by a jeering mob chanting, "Run, piggy, run." Is this a sign that car crash Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Home Secretary Priti Patel have finally got a grip on law and order in the United Kingdom? Sadly, not. It's a sign, rather, that under Johnson's disastrous premiership, Britain is enforcing a bizarre and unjust authoritarianism where genuinely malign forces such as Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter, who even managed to blockade Oxford Circus on Sunday, get treated with kid gloves, while peaceful lovers of liberty like the anti-lockdown, anti-mask demonstrators in Trafalgar Square on Saturday are maligned, misrepresented, and ruthlessly crushed with arrests, brutality, and swinging fines. Well, they're passionate, right? They're passionate. So I guess they can be forgiven. You remember when we were told that coronavirus was spread through the air? As Ellen Partridge would say, liquid AIDS. And you remember how terrified everyone was of this? Well, now the U.S. Centers for Disease Control said that it erroneously published new guidance acknowledging that the coronavirus spreads through tiny particles that can linger in the air and travel beyond 6 feet. CDC officials have been saying for months that the virus primarily spreads between people in close contact within about 6 feet via large droplets produced when an infected person coughs, sneezes, or talks that ends up in the mouths or noses of people nearby. Those recommendations prompted social distancing and mask-related rules. Nevertheless, on Friday, the agency reportedly added that tiny particles or aerosols can travel beyond 6 feet, could spread the virus. Come Monday, the CDC abruptly dropped its new guidance and reverted to its position that the people mainly transmit the disease to others nearby through large droplets. But the ambiguity here is simply going to result in people being scared to death, which appears to have been the whole point from the beginning. Story from the Mail here. Sweden has beaten coronavirus by refusing to shut the country down and achieving herd immunity, according to an expert. The Scandinavian nation was the only country in Europe not to introduce strict lockdown measures at the start of the pandemic. But scientists believe that this may have helped it avoid a second wave of COVID-19 as it continues to record its lowest number of cases since March, with just 28 infections per 100,000 people. This figure is less than half of the UK's own infection rate of 69 per 100,000 people. Professor Kim Sneppen, an expert in the spread of coronavirus at the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen. Danes get very upset when you pronounce that city in the German way. Said that Sweden might have beaten the pandemic. He told Denmark's Politiken newspaper, there's some evidence that the Swedes have built up a degree in immunity to the virus, which, along with what else they are doing to stop the spread, is enough to control the disease. Perhaps the epidemic is over there. He said that the virus may now have run out of steam. That is what they have said. On the positive side, they may now be finished with the epidemic. Sweden was initially criticized at the start of the outbreak after recording a spike in its mortality rates, which was 5 times that of Denmark and 10 times that of Norway and Finland. Number of deaths reached 24. Number of deaths per 24 hours peaked in April at 115, with more than half in care homes. But its 7-day average for coronavirus-related deaths is now 0. Yeah, 0. Remember when you were being told just a couple of months ago that everyone in Sweden was going to die, that they were crazy, that their government had decided to murder their own people? Well, that doesn't seem to have happened. Not that it seemed to affect what the other countries are doing. And my own country of Canada, the latest federal modeling on the COVID-19 pandemic shows that in the short term, Canada's epidemic is set to keep growing, predicting up to 156,000 total cases and 9,300 deaths by October 2nd, unless Canadians readopt the same degree of health precautions they took in the early months of the pandemic. This is not accurate. Masks were not made mandatory in the early months of the pandemic, were they? The fewer deaths we get, the more masks we see. That Dr. Theresa Tam thinks it's all about our behavior. That if we show COVID-19 that we're not going to be taken in by its sneakiness, by its viciousness, then we'll beat the virus. A moral question, a question of will. Of course, that is not how viruses work, but such is the new science. And another sad story from my country, from the Canadian press. A new survey suggests that the recent rise in new COVID-19 cases across Canada comes with a similar increase in support for the mandatory wearing of masks in public places. The online survey by Léger and the Association for Canadian Studies says 83% of respondents feel government should order people to wear a mask in all indoor public spaces. That represented a 16% increase from July before the recent rise in COVID-19 cases has sparked concern. Many parts of the country are entering the dreaded second wave of the pandemic. No, not dreaded, hoped for. This is, oh no, save us, second wave. If the second wave doesn't come, we might have to give people back their freedom. 87% felt wearing a mask was a civic duty because it protects others from COVID-19, while 21% felt it was an infringement on personal freedoms, a decline of 6% from July. As for the anti-mask protests that have happened in various parts of the country in recent weeks, 88% of respondents said they opposed the demonstrations, while 12% supported them. In a way, again, the anti-maskers are a minority and not a growing minority in Canada, said Léger Executive Vice President Christian Bourque. The fear of catching it is on the rise. People believe that there will be a second wave on the rise, and now people saying we should make the masks mandatory is on the rise. You see, terror works. Masks everywhere now, despite concerns about their efficacy. But the Australian state of Victoria, much, much crazier even than Boris Johnson's of Britain. William Briggs writes today, we have reached the point most authorities are pretending to forget the huge difference between infections, cases, and deaths. Deaths have dropped to bottom levels, but because of huge increases in testing, positive tests are up, causing new panic. The hunger to lock back down is great. The state of Victoria is and has been run by progressives, i.e. Labour, for some time. Its government has moved to the concentration camp phase of its battle against a typical, not at all unexpected or unusual disease. Before we detail this and answer why, here is the state of the corona doom crisis in all Australia. And 7. There is no crisis in Australia, none at all. There's no crisis in Victoria either. About a quarter of all Australians live in this state. So assuming the deaths are more or less uniform, corona doom attributed deaths in Victoria are about 1 to 2 a day, with considerable variability, of course. According to one source from 2019, all Australia saw an average of 3.3 traffic deaths a day. So corona doom is roughly on par with driving. Funnily enough, driving has not been outlawed. Now this next section is absolutely incredible. The Victorian government will debate a new bill in the state parliament this week, which would hand authorities the power to forcibly detain conspiracy theorists and people suspected to likely spread coronavirus, such as anti-lockdown protesters and their close contacts. If passed, the Omnibus Emergency Measures Bill will allow the state to detain anyone they suspect of being high risk or likely to negligently spread COVID-19, either if they have the virus or have been in contact with an infected person. According to The Age newspaper, a state government spokesman said the rule could be applied to, quote, conspiracy theorists who refuse to self-isolate or severely drug-affected or mentally impaired people who do not have the capacity to quarantine, unquote. Those detained could then be placed in quarantine facilities such as hotels where they can be monitored by authorities. I wonder if people who show actual data might be labeled conspiracy theorists. The data imply government is not needed, and this is a hateful message, not only to those in charge, but to, it must be admitted, the majority of the population. It's not only COVID camps, but the government is also creating an army of state truth and secrets inspectors, or Stasi. This new internal security forces core, quote, would allow people to be detained indefinitely and give sweeping powers to untrained people to become authorized officers with sweeping powers to arrest and detain fellow Victorians, unquote. The best news for those most terrified of the non-crisis is that Once detained, you have no rights under law and can be detained for an indefinite period. Also, there is no provision whatsoever for a review of the detention. These harsh actions will keep the terrified safe from infection, or so the terrified believe, so the costs will be worth it to them. One more data point, this time from New York. Here's the state of the corona doom crisis in New York State. Number of deaths, 18 September, 2. About 95% of people now wear masks outdoors in New York City. Many even while jogging are far from many people. Most are more terrified now of the long past crisis than they were during the actual crisis, when mask wearing was maybe a third or less. Showing pictures like the above to the terrified does not bring them relief. Instead, the only emotion they are likely to show is anger at you for showing them that their fear has no justification. Like Melbourne, New York City is a progressive enclave. The citizens elect progressives to watch over themselves. The elected politicians promise to keep them safe from disease and deny other threats like riots. The people believe. The citizens in these cities search for authority as is proper, but since they value their own skin above all other things, they turn to false gods. All that matters is staying alive, never mind the quality, until such time as they tire of life, upon which they declare a right to death. Did you notice that the people calling for the most punitive restrictions are strongest in support of this right? They haven't been cackling about it at the moment, true, but the observation holds. Neil Ferguson is being trotted out again. He is one man who proves you can't be fired for being wrong in the right direction. Headline, England-wide COVID lockdown needed sooner rather than later, says former advisor. Professor Neil Ferguson, who resigned from the government's Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, or SAGE, said the country was facing a perfect storm after controls were eased over summer. On Friday, Boris Johnson admitted in a speech that Britain was entering a second wave of coronavirus. And then he shows, again, COVID-19 weekly attributed deaths going into September, and we see a huge spike in March, April, and then May. It goes like this, and then down pretty much to nothing. But one can never be too careful. Boris Johnson had this crazy idea that he was going to test everyone in Britain for COVID-19 and said that the cost of this would be more than the entire amount of money being spent on the National Health Service. One wonders why he is not in a rubber room. The CDC, as of Sunday night, had just over 184,000 attributed official corona doom deaths. The media, Google, etc., had over 202,000. As I've told you from the beginning, medical data is always a mess, but the media was always higher than CDC. Golly. Yeah. And I don't know, the media seems to think that this is going to result in Donald Trump being defeated. From lockdown skeptics, our hopeless, busted flush of a prime minister is going to announce today that pubs and restaurants will have to close by 10 p.m. from Thursday, with table-only service for the foreseeable future. Exceptions to the rule of 6 for weddings and funerals will be eliminated too. Needless to say, this is to fend off a wholly imaginary second wave. They can't keep this up for much longer in Britain before there's an entire collapse of their economy. This is even before considering, what's going to happen with Brexit and the separation from Europe. Alex Berenson writes, no, we need to accept that 3 million Americans will die this year, and we can't keep everyone alive forever, no matter how hard we try. And that our bizarre fixation on making every decision as if COVID deaths are the only societal outcome that matters is profoundly wrong. No country is safe. No country will ever be safe. No country can be safe. Safety is a mirage. Those empty hospital beds are an illusion. The row is hiding. It's waiting. The apocalypse is nigh. Just wait 2 weeks. The Washington Post has never been wrong about this before. And again, Rising cases in many states spur warning of an autumn surge. A warning or an expectation? Because they seem pretty thrilled about this. I don't know. I would have thought that by now there'd be a lot of embarrassed people in government and amongst the medical establishment, amongst the latrine wallas. But nope, no, they're not going to admit anything. There's Don Lemon, looking at his stupid face, looking at me from his Wikipedia picture. Did you know that he is a winner of both an Emmy Award and an Edward R. Murrow Award? I guess it's not necessary for Edward R. Murrow Award winner to actually know how the United States Constitution works and how it is amended, or the purpose of the Electoral College. This is from Matt Vespa at Town Hall. CNN's Don Lemon has to be given a raise. Seriously, his meltdowns are pure gold, and they never cease to amaze. Lemon, like most of liberal America, is going nuts over the prospect of Donald Trump picking the late RBG successor on the Supreme Court. Ginsburg passed away last Friday at the age of 87. Because he's president, the whole system has to be destroyed. That's literally what he said. The meltdown was so much that even his CNN colleague, Chris Cuomo, thought it was too much, all but telling him to slow his roll. Okay, that's something that young people say, apparently. That's the truth from the streets. Lemon justified this because Trump was elected by winning the Electoral College, but not winning the popular vote, as if this had never happened before. It's happened 4 other times with John Quincy Adams, Benjamin Harrison, Rutherford B. Hayes, and George W. Bush. We're still here, and it's a rare occurrence. Yet Lemon said, because the minority has a say, we need to destroy the Electoral College and whatever he sees fit, because this is a grade A liberal temper tantrum. Someone called Nicholas Fondacaro responded, so stupid even Fredo can't believe what he's hearing. Don Lemon actually argues that if the roles were reversed and Democrats controlled the Senate, they would let Trump nominate his Scottish pick, adding, we're going to have to blow up the entire system because minority GOP have a voice. Stephen Miller added, Don Lemon doesn't know how constitutional amendments are passed. Cuomo literally had to give him a 10-second civics lesson that this would require a constitutional amendment and that there aren't enough votes to do this, which Lemon idiotically responded they could if they packed the courts. There's no way 3/4 of state legislatures would sign off on this, but that's not really at the core of this meltdown. It's that Trump isn't doing anything unprecedented. The president appoints judges. The Senate confirms them. Trump won the 2016 election so he can pick RBG's replacement. Republicans expanded their majority in the Senate in 2018. We can do this. We're going to do this. And Lemon responds by saying he wants to torch it all, pack the courts, and abolish the Electoral College. Those are all unprecedented and illiberal methods of dealing with losing an election. It seems the Democrats have decided that they are never going to lose an election again, that they simply can't. They can't let it happen, and they will prevent Republicans from winning by any means necessary, as they say. So I'm going to talk a little, I'll go to the chat first, and I'm going to talk about some individualized craziness here. Let's see, Brandon Smith says, hard to believe it hasn't motivated people to think more independently. Well, there's this fear of being alone that Christopher Lasch noted as early as 1977. This was one of the results of so-called child-centered education. Latrine Wallace, yes. I'm quite fond of that. I've been reading Evelyn Waugh. I read Black Mischief, and then I read A Handful of Dust, which is just an absolutely savage novel. And then I reread Scoop. He's a writer that can, make me laugh out loud consistently with just a simple declarative sentence. Neil Terry says we have mask rules for businesses, which is dumb enough, but thank God very few people just walk around in them. Increasingly, my experience by looking out the window is that it's more and more and more. Okay, 300 million vaccines still available in America by summer 2021. Jim Bowden says KMG, yes, here in Australia, particularly Premier Dan Andrews, a Marxist. He is effing mad as a cut snake. Believe me, dystopian world in Victoria. Neil Terry says, strangely, after 4 to 5 years without catching a flu, I had my worst flu in years last December after being coughed on by a Chinese woman wearing a surgical mask on the bus. Coincidence? I've mentioned before that this is my experience of having gone many more years with a cold or a flu. I just became sick as a dog in December, and I'm pretty much convinced that I actually had COVID-19. The dry hacking cough, the body racked with pain, the inability to, couldn't sleep at night. Chogokin 666, Junior Mervin, or is it Mervin or Marvin? Police and Thieves Rooting the Nation. Yes, I remember The Clash covered that song. Jim Bowden points out Sweden just temporarily stopped importing doctors and engineers from Africa in the Middle East. Again from Neil Terry, the most bewildering parts of the story are Biden gaffing by rear-ending someone while on a secret trip, then even stiffing the guy for a minor repair bill. True to form. Ibram X. Kendi, who is a genius, I suppose, and he's teaching us so many things. Actually, what I'm saying is that we should eliminate the term not racist from the human vocabulary as opposed to another kind of vocabulary. We are either being racist or anti-racist. Is that clear for you? There's no such thing as not racist. I don't know what that means. Steve Saylor comments, reading Ibram X. Kendi, Ta-Nehisi's Coates, best-selling successor at The Atlantic, is like reading Stalin, except with a dictator's wit and irony. More, again, with Black women and their hair. Actually, a mob on the street shouting, "What do we protect? Black women's hair." I'm not making this up. I am not making this up. They just keep saying this over and over and over again, and eventually everyone will believe it. Well, I guess, we've seen this with COVID-19. Hey, no one's dying anymore. That doesn't make any difference. What difference does it make that no one's dying anymore? Science, people. Black Lives Matter removes page, encouraging the disruption of the Western nuclear family during a massive cleanup of their national website. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages. Villages refers to the African proverb, it takes a village, which works to uplift children by providing them support from their entire communities. Yeah, that's the way it used to work here, too, actually. The national page for BLM has updated several sections of the website. The Grassroot organization, is that what it is? That works mostly in local chapter-based groups, removed several pages from their About section in the cleanup, according to an archive of their website. Included in the removal was the site's What We Believe page and pages providing biographies of the national chapter leadership and co-founders. Internet archives suggest that the website was updated on September the 17th. The now deleted What We Believe page touts that the organization works to acknowledge, respect, and celebrate differences and commonalities. We are unapologetically Black in our positioning in affirming that Black Lives Matter. We need not qualify our position to love and desire freedom and justice for ourselves as a prerequisite for wanting the same for others. And while the page details a series of beliefs from the organization, the group does celebrate its positioning in the global Black family, acknowledging that Black people across the world lead different lives and have access Two different privileges. We make our spaces family-friendly and enable parents to fully participate with their children, the now deleted webpage once read. We dismantle the patriarchal practice that requires mothers to work double shifts so that they can mother in private, even as they participate in public justice work. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. Yes, and there's a picture of Patrice Cullors, executive director and board president, a co-founder, and this has been deleted from their website. Are they looking to find people, I don't know, who are easier on the eyes or less crazy in their organization? Because an awful lot of money is pouring through that now. Oh, the term nuclear family first sprang up in the early 1900s and has been catapulted to the mainstream by conservative groups who use the term to reinforce themes surrounding patriarchal heteronormativity. Yikes! Activists are against the term as it has been used to slander single-parent households, multi-parent households, and alphabet people households. Really? No, the nuclear family is pretty straightforward. It means, not an extended family. Yeah. Let's see. Let's have some more craziness here. Oh, Alyssa Milano. She never fails to please. Of course, she has called for what? Defunding the police? She called police when she believed an armed gunman was on her Bell Canyon property in California Sunday morning. At least 7 Ventura County Sheriff's vehicles, 1 K-9 unit, a police helicopter, and 1 Los Angeles Fire Department team sat down the street on standby. Daily Mail obtained exclusive photos showing the first responders coming to the aid of the actress and activist who is in favor of defunding the police. It turned out it was a neighborhood teen with an air gun shooting at squirrels, a resident told the Daily Mail.com. Alyssa Milano lives in an 8,000 square foot, 2.5 million home in the upscale gated community that sits just 20 minutes north of Los Angeles. A neighbor tells the Daily Mail, "We first noticed the helicopter circling overhead very low. I knew something was going on. It's usually such a quiet community. Then we saw all the police cars parked in front of Alyssa's homes. They had their guns at the ready and seemed very serious." As the morning progressed, readers received updates from residents. Alyssa and her talent agent husband, Dave Buglieri, 39, they said, had dialed 911 when they heard what they believed to be gunshots on their 1.39-acre property. They allegedly told the emergency hotline the sound scared their dogs and made them feel like a gunman was nearby. A description was given of a suspect to the officers who was male, 40 years old, with a long rifle. Apparently that was untrue. Melissa Milano, the sort of person who's always screaming about the police making mistakes. Oh, that was just a toy weapon. Oh, it's not so easy to figure that out, is it? Especially at a distance. Okay, from NBC, Cardi B and her sister sued over altercation with group displaying Trump flag, MAGA hat. Her sister and her sister's partner were named in a lawsuit seeking damages for a beach altercation earlier this month with a group of people displaying a flag with the name of President Donald Trump, according to a case filed Monday in the New York State Supreme Court. The rapper's sister, Hennessy Carolina, was she actually named after the brandy? Could that be true? Because I'm suspecting that it is true. Is accused of battering, assaulting, threatening, and defaming 3 people who gathered on a New York beach near a vehicle flying the Trump flag, one of whom was wearing what the suit describes as a MAGA hat. Cardi B and model Michelle Diaz, Carolina's partners, are also named in the suit for their alleged roles in defaming and libeling the trio in subsequent online social media posts. Plaintiffs Manuel Alarcon, Peter Caliendo, and Pauline Caliendo alleged that in the September argument over parking at Smith Point Beach on Long Island, Carolina, lobbed obscenities and violent threats at them and their family. In doing so, the suit claims she assaulted and battered them by potentially exposing them to coronavirus through copious spraying of spittle. And what she's making this crazy, oh yes, my sister can't go to the beach in the Hamptons without Trump supporters harassing because they were by themselves, and Santa Claus was harassing my cis girlfriend, all because they are an Afro/Hispanic gay couple. Responding to a tweet by California Republican congressional candidate Buzz Patterson that insinuated Carolina started the fight, Cardi B later tweeted, "No, that big pink man was harassing my sister girlfriend to move her car for no reason. And then my sister came back, they had a back and forth, and they stood quit when she whipped that phone out." Yes, the plaintiffs are variously called racist, Karen, Pinkman, and Santa Claus. And a woman who is quite possibly even more annoying than Cardi B comes from Britain, and her name is Jamila Jamil. She's quite a good-looking woman, I must confess. I'm seeing a picture of her wearing an evening gown, and it is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. It's a long gown with a bodice. It goes down to the floor. Only where her knees are, there's about a foot there where it's been cut out, and there's just sheer material. So you can see her knees. She's talking about privilege and good skin. Someone had sent her a message on Instagram saying, "Your skin is so perfect." And so evidently, Jamila has given this a lot of thought. She responded, "My skin is clear because A, privileged people have more access to good quality nutrition, and also our lives are significantly less stressful than the lives of those with less privilege. I also get to sleep more because of this. All of these things keep my hormones in balance, and I'm able to address food intolerance easily. I believe that trans rights are human rights. And C, I exfoliate twice a week." In addition to her response, the British screen star then shared a screenshot of the exchange on her Instagram stories, adding the caption, "Try not to compare your skin to that of privileged people too often. We don't talk about this enough." Evidently not. So, hair, the skin, yeah, and as you can imagine, amid the supporting and fawning comments came a flood of criticism, some of which the London native took screenshots of and posted on Instagram. One read, "She didn't compare anything, she just gave you to a compliment, and you took it as an opportunity to brag about your privilege." Another stated, "Girl, don't you see out of touch you sound?" It was so condescending. No one was comparing their skin. They just complimented you. And you're acting like I'm rich. That's why you're poor. Sorry, love. Is not a good look. Could she be more annoying? Commented a third on the image sharing platform. This woman tells a lot of stories about herself, and there's a lot of controversy about the various claims she's made. Apparently she's had one of the saddest lives, I don't know, in British history. And I guess it's what the fault of white people, even though white people have been very, very good to Jamila Jamil. There seems to be some rule that she has to appear in the Daily Mail, I don't know, 5-6 times a week. So, as I mentioned, she's a good-looking woman. And I suppose that is one of the reasons why she's on television. But it has now become almost verboten to mention a connection between people being on television and their good looks, at least as if they are women. There's a story from The Root by Jay Connor. "I'm a big believer in protecting my energy. So, to that end, Jason Whitlock doesn't exist in my universe at all. However, far too often, Jason Whitlocks. And try as I may ignore his unique brand of clownery, I'm left with no choice but to acknowledge his Negro nonsense. You notice this in recent years that black people have started to use Negroes as an insult directed at their own people when they don't like. On Sunday, a man who once called LeBron James a bigot who promotes racism and incites violence with his bogus narratives on race, I find that warming to this Jason Whitlock fellow. Published an article that I won't link to because he ain't getting clicks from me, in which he said a bunch of incredibly sexist shit about his former ESPN colleagues Katie Nolan and Maria Taylor. Specifically, he stated that Taylor got her ESPN gig because she's tall, attractive, and quite personable on television, and that Nolan's beauty intoxicates TV executives, bloggers, and journalists, and it masks a lack of accomplishment, qualifications, and skill. Tall, attractive, and quite personable on television. Well, that's what seemed to be just the ticket, right? Whitlock continued, beauty transformed Katie Nolan from bartender to seven-figure personality, Emmy Award winner, and the darling of aroused bloggers and TV critics willing to ignore her pedestrian humor and inability to execute live television. Well, you know, if it comes down to it, let's have good-looking people on TV. Because are they on TV because they're so smart? Because their analytical powers are so developed? I don't think so. This fellow seems very, very angry. Did I mention this came from the sports equivalent of Tekashi 69? Ooh, sick burn. A man whose entire career is predicated on either outright trolling or disparaging his own people, as opposed to demonstrating that even the smallest degree of actual sports aptitude or talent. Who in the hell is he to call out anyone for actually doing their job as opposed to whatever the hell you call it that he does to get a check? Paul Johnson commented, men like Jason Whitlock are exactly the reason why women have issues in the corporate structure. To describe the hard work and due diligence that these and other women put in and day out to not only be given an opportunity, but also to be able to keep their jobs is ridiculous. Okay. And there was another similar story here. Radio host fired for degrading tweet about female ESPN reporter's outfit. This is from The Independent. Veteran Chicago radio host Dan McNeil had been fired after making misogynistic comments. In a tweet that has since been deleted, McNeil posted a screenshot of Monday Night Football reporter Maria Taylor, who wore a stylish black faux leather top on ESPN's broadcast. McNeil referenced the adult film industry by posing the question, NFL sideline reporter on host for the Adult Video News Annual Awards presentation. Sideline reporters. Exactly what are they reporting? Back when I used to watch football, the score would be, say, 24-3 at the end of the first half. And so, coach, what do you think you have to do to get your team back into the game? And the coach would say something like, well, stop sucking, obviously. Yeah, thank you for that. They don't need people on the sidelines. Maria Taylor responded, well, Danny dearest, if you would like to continue making sexist comments about me, please bring your misogyny with you to the NBA Countdown doubleheader I'll be hosting tomorrow night. Hey, ladies, remember you can wear whatever you feel confident in. I rather doubt that. Would they be allowed to go to work wearing pajamas? Although, didn't the Today Show, they had those two women on at the end? What was her name? Hoda Kotb, and the other one? Drinking wine and wearing pajamas? Oh, okay. So Vox Day comments, the Katie Nolan versus Jason Whitlock Thunderdome took a wild twist Monday night when Telcom X took time out of his busy schedule to chime in on the Twitter rager that has blue check marks up in arms, disgusting that this outlet is bragging about a black woman having to lock her account from online harassment. Talcum, aka Sean King, tweeted before someone let him in on Katie being white. Really, really white. In fairness, Sean King has yet to realize that he isn't black, so it is understandable that his ability to distinguish black people from white people might not be highly developed. America's race wars have officially gone meta. When a white man who thinks he's black attacks a black man for criticizing a white woman, the white man thinks he's black. All that we're missing is the white man who thinks he's black thinking the black man is white and attempting to play the race card on him. Come on. Women are on television primarily because they're good looking, and I don't really see anything particularly wrong with that. So it's time to start beating up on Beethoven again. Alex Ross of the New Yorker has he's written a balls-achingly long essay, as all of his essays are. Apparently, not enough attention is paid to Indonesian gamelan music. That fellow Carter, what's his name? Carter Burwell, who does music for the Coen Brothers movies. He seems to use that a fair amount in his scores. But they're just incredible. This fellow is just so ridiculously pretentious. Let's go to the end. Okay, let's go to the end here. I'll just read the last two paragraphs. The poetic or poietic and the aesthetic should have equal weight when we pick up the pieces of the past. On the other hand, we can be aware that Handel invested in the business of slavery. On the other, we can see a measure of justice when Morris Robinson sings his music in concert. We can be conscious of the racism of Mozart's portrayal in Monostatus in The Magic Flute, or of the misogyny of Così fan tutte, yet contemporary stagings can put Mozart's stereotypes in a radical new light. There is no need to reach a final verdict to judge each artist innocent or guilty. Living with history means living with history's complexities, contradictions, and failings. The ultimate mistake is to look to music or to any art form as a zone of moral improvement, a refuge of sweetness and light. Attempts to cleanse the canon of disreputable figures ends up replicating the great man theory in a negative register, with arch villains taking the place of geniuses. Because all art is the product of our grandiose predatory species, it reveals the worst in our natures as well as the best. Like every beautiful thing we have created, music can be a weapon of division and destruction. The philosopher Theodore W. Adorno, in a characteristically pitiless mood, wrote, "Every work of art is an uncommitted crime." What a maroon. And Così fan tutte is misogynistic. Is that? It means they're all the same. It's a reference to women and their inconstancy, as Lorenzo da Ponte, the librettist, saw it. So he begins by quoting the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. His book, Stride Towards Freedom. I set out to drive from Atlanta, Georgia to Montgomery, Alabama. The Metropolitan Opera was on the radio with the performance of one of my favorite operas, Donizetti's Lucia di Lammermoor. So with the beauty of the countryside, the inspiration of Donizetti's inimitable music, and the splendor of the skies, the usual monotony that accompanies a relatively long drive, especially when one is alone, was dispelled in pleasant diversions. What does it mean, if anything, that King was listening to a bel canto opera as he made his historic journey to preach his first sermon at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church? This is an incredibly labored lead. So apparently, Martin Luther King Jr. liked the Donizetti opera. And the significance of that is, well, Donizetti was white and Martin Luther King was black. Let's see. One response would be to find something curious or even contradictory in the image of King enjoying Donizetti behind the wheel of his car. He was supposed to become a titan in the civil rights movement, Classical music is a world in which Black people have seldom been allowed to play a leading role. Much the same question could be asked about W.E.B. Du Bois, who admired the music of Richard Wagner to such an extent that he attended the Bayreuth Festival in 1936. Even though Wagner was notoriously racist, Du Bois said the musical dramas of Wagner tell of human life as he lived it, and no human being, white or black, can afford not to know them if he would know life. Actually, Richard Wagner's anti-Semitism, it's kind of a mixed bag there. What with insisting and that Herman Levi conduct operas at Bayreuth. Okay. Several scholars have conjectured that King was sending a cultural signal when he inserted Donizetti in stride toward freedom. Yeah, I suppose that's one way of looking at it. It is equally questionable to assume that King and Du Bois's fondness for classical music lends it some sort of universal anti-racist virtue. In that sense, my attraction to these anecdotes of fandom is suspect. I'm a white American who grew up with the classics, and I'm troubled by the presumption that they are stamped with whiteness and are even aligned with white supremacy, as some scholars have lightly argued. Then just stop listening to it then. I cannot counter this suggestion simply by gesturing towards important Black figures who cherish the same tradition, or by reeling off the names of Black singers and composers. The exceptions remain exceptions. The world is blindingly white, both in its history and its present. Since nationwide protests over police violence erupted in May and June, American culture has been engaged in an examination, however nominal, of its relationship with racism. Such an examination is sorely needed in classical music because of its extreme dependence on a problematic past. The universe is complex. The field must acknowledge a history of systemic racism. No, it doesn't. Little man, must is not a word said to princes. While also honoring the individual experiences of Black composers, musicians, and listeners, Black people have long been marginalized, but they have never been outsiders. This spring, the journal Music Theory Online published Music Theory and the White Racial Frame, an article by Philip Ewell, who teaches at Hunter College. It begins with the sentence, "Music theory is white." It goes on to argue that the whiteness of the discipline is manifest not only in the lack of diversity in its membership, but also in a deep-seated ideology of white supremacy, one that insidiously affects how music is analyzed and taught. The main target of Ewell's critique is the early 20th century Austrian theorist Heinrich Schenker, who parsed musical structures in terms of foreground, middle ground, and background levels, teasing out the tonal formulas that underpin large-scale movements. Schenker held racist views, particularly with regard to Black people, and according to Ewell, those views seeped into the seemingly abstract principles of his theoretical work. Yeah. Let's see, Beethoven. What was it? What did he call him there? Just a slightly better than average composer or some such? Oh my God, and here intersectionality. Oh boy. The Journal of Schenkerian Studies, which is based in the University of North Texas, chose to devote 90 pages to a brief talk. Some are supportive, others dismissive. One accused Ewell, who was African-American, of exhibiting Black anti-Semitism, although Ewell had not mentioned Schenker's Jewishness. On social media, Ewell's colleagues came to his defense and questioned the journal's methodology. The historian Kyra Thurman wrote, "Did the Journal of Schenkerian Studies really publish a response to Professor Ewell's scholarship that was anonymous?" Yes, National Review and Fox News somehow stumbled on the episode and cast it as so-called cancel culture run amok. It was claimed that Ewell was trying to ban Beethoven, or nothing of the sort had been suggested. Thurman has written a paper called "Performing Lieder, Hearing Race." Lieder is art song. Kunstlied. But yeah, that's what when I listen to Schubert or Hugo Wolf, that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing race. And it's just now that I learned this, it's just what to do. The hysterical complaints that Ewell was proposing to cancel the classical canon stemmed mainly from a blog post. It what you call Beethoven, an above-average composer who has been propped up by the white male frame, both consciously and subconsciously, with descriptors such as genius, master, and masterwork. This is provocation, though it is hardly the first to have been lobbed at the great man. Debussy wrote that Beethoven's sonatas were badly written for the piano, and Ned Rorem, he was gay, memorably dinged the Ninth Symphony as the first piece of junk in the grand style. You know, Glenn Gould, who I mentioned earlier, said of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony that he didn't understand what point that Beethoven was trying to make. And I have to say, I feel rather the same, much as I feel as the connection of medieval hymn with Faust in Mahler's Eighth Symphony, Symphony of 1,000. The whiteness of classical music is above all an American problem. Oh, why? The racial and ethnic makeup of the canon is hardly surprising given European demographics before the 20th century. But when that tradition was transplanted to the multicultural United States, it blended into the racial hierarchy that had governed the country from its founding. The white majority tended to adopt European music as a badge of its supremacy. I don't know, perhaps they just liked it. The classical music institutions that emerged in the mid and late 19th century, the New York Philharmonic, the Boston Symphony, the Metropolitan Opera, and the like, became temples to European gods, as Lawrence Levine argued in his 1988 book, Highbrow, Lowbrow. Little effort was made to cultivate American composers. It seemed more important to manufacture a fantasy of Beethoven grandeur. Okay, well, leave aside the question of the quality of Beethoven's music. Beethoven was a revolutionary force in music for several reasons. Haydn wrote 104 numbered symphonies, and there are others which have been classified as symphonies since his death. Beethoven wrote 9. What's the significance of that? Well, each symphony had to be radically different from the previous one, which is certainly not something you saw in Haydn or Mozart. And so you have this desperate desire to be wholly original. Another thing with Beethoven, he was the first, Haydn made a lot of money when he traveled to Britain, but Haydn had been a liveried servant for the Esterhazy family, and Beethoven was the first great entrepreneur, a composer. The idea of Beethoven, storming heaven with music, this was incredibly powerful and influenced everyone that came after him. But this just goes on and on and on and on. Oh, here's a sure giveaway. Of course, racism was endemic in the pop sphere as well. There's no escape? As a host of scholarly studies has made clear, in an essay titled Race, Black Sound, one word, and the Remaking a Musicological Discourse, with the R-E brackets around it. Ooh, that looks really complicated. Matthew Morrison marshals a formidable array of research and theory to argue that the American pop music industry is inextricably rooted in the racist routines of 19th century blackface culture. So Alex Ross, a rap fan, is he? That sounds kind of problematic to me. Some historians and critics have tried to find redeeming features in a practice that pervasively ridiculed African-American voices and bodies. Not people, but bodies. Eric Lawton's classic 1993 book, Love and Theft, argues that working-class blackface performers demonstrated a profound white investment in black culture, even as they carried out appalling acts of exploitation. For Morrison, these counterfeit and imagined performances of blackness are better understood as affirmations of white identity with racial mockery integral to the act. Mockery of elite European art was part of the formula as well. Black performers eventually took up careers on the minstrelsy circuit, but only at the cost of playing along with white fantasies. Okay, enough of that. Okay, take a look at this kind of Steve Saylor Day here, and he had a look at Alex Ross's essay. In reality, for every worthy black composer of classical music, there are probably, say, 1,000 even better white composers who are almost completely forgotten today. Think about the best athlete you knew growing up. He probably topped out at, say, AA ball in the minor leagues or the like. Well, Europe has had over the last 400 years maybe 100,000 composers of the equivalent skill. Heck, the European classical heritage is so enormously rich that lots of music, even by the immortals, has been forgotten. For instance, my favorite Pacific opera project production of the last few years was Rossini's La Gazzetta, in what appears to have been his only second production in the United States since the 19th century, and Rossini is an all-time top half-dozen opera composer. Indeed, he is. The Met has yet, this is Alex Ross, the Yet has met to present an opera by a black composer, though a production of Terence Blanchard's Fire Shut Up in My Bones is planned for a future season. That sounds dire. As you may recall, when Spike Lee's career was briefly on an upward trajectory long ago in the 1980s, he employed his father, a veteran jazz musician, to score his movies, but then his widow father remarried to a white Jewish woman, breaking Spike's heart. He fired his dad and hired the depressing Blanchard, and his movies have been mostly bad ever since. Saylor declares, of course, Western classical music is the master language of music. For instance, gamelan music, while cute, isn't exactly Beethoven or Wagner. We have the judgment both of highly cultured East Asians and of the world's movie fans who expect film scores based on the 19th century Romantic tradition. Basically, the woke argument comes down to Beethoven couldn't have been all that. After all, he was white. But he was. Between now and Beethoven's 250th birthday in December, we're going to be told countless times of the wokely enlightened that Beethoven enjoyed white privilege. Pretty miserable childhood. You might think that they would strategically decide that it doesn't help their campaign to diss Beethoven. After all, Beethoven is Beethoven. The smart thing would be to not remind white people that Beethoven was white, and they hate him for that. But they are so twisted by ressentiment that they just can't help themselves. And he goes through a list of the number of times various composers' vocal works have been performed. And at the top, we have Giuseppe Verdi, followed by Mozart, Puccini, Rossini, Donizetti, Richard Wagner, Bizet, Johann Strauss, Richard Strauss, etc., etc., etc. Beethoven is far down on the list because, of course, he only wrote one opera. This reminds me, if you ever watch Jeopardy, that the questions for classical music are ridiculously easy. You know, Alex Trebek will say, in this Beethoven opera, well, he only wrote one. Or in this Bizet opera, well, he only wrote two, and you're not going to be asking about the Pearl Fishers. I can guarantee that. It's always going to be Carmen. But what makes a man turn quisling like Alex Ross? This is a man who has devoted his life to writing about music and to a large extent classical music. And now he's decided he's got to hate himself and white people because classical music is overwhelmingly white. And Steve Saylor ends, it's a steep pyramid with tough competition, e.g. Bach is barely 1% as popular as Verdi. Two of the top opera composers died young, Mozart at 35, but also Bizet at 36. And he mentions a speculative essay on what Mozart would have composed if he'd lived out his 10, such as around 1810, an opera of Faust with a libretto by Goethe himself. Well, I don't know. I'm a big fan of Lorenzo da Ponte, the 3 operas that he did. Let's see, Alex Ross, he was on at Beethoven years and years ago. And I guess this is what you have to do in order to fit in now, in order to be able to show your face in those salons, you know. Oh, well, of course, white privilege. Oh, black bodies, etc. Yeah. Samuel Lippman, the late music critic who used to write for Commentary, he wrote years ago, For whatever the exact nature of his greatness, there can be little doubt that in complexity of workmanship, Beethoven stands a distant second to Bach, and in refinement of expression, he stands a distant second to Mozart. And I'd have to say that I agree with that. But of course, I don't know. There must be about 20 pieces by Beethoven, which I love. Maybe his Piano Sonata number 27, Opus 90. You can go on YouTube and hear it played by Wilhelm Kempf. It's a lot different from most of his piano sonatas. None of that storming heaven stuff there. Oh yes, did you know that the Japanese love classical music? That it's a tradition in the West to perform Handel's Messiah around Christmastide. In Japan, they perform, wait for it, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Is the twee twisted tonight, says Bob Paxson. No, it's just normal tea. I don't think they're going to get anyone giving a rat about vaccination if they get the vaccine. How many different vaccines are there? Is there going to have to be some sort of bake-off there? Yes. Philip Daniel says, I'd say Max Reger is the most unjustly neglected, better than Mahler, and I know the KMG show agrees. Yeah. Neil Terry says, for those curious about how public manias work, here we are living through a racial one, but aided by corporate funding, academy, internet addiction, and social atomization. Woke capital, as they call it. Philip Daniel says, Spohr and Hummel are not given enough attention. Reicha composed some great fugues. Czerny is more than just his piano exercises. Weber is wonderful. Well, there's a lot of composers and there's only so much time. I'd have to say that an interesting thing happened with the recording of classical music starting in the 1970s with the so-called authentic movement. We're going to record all these things again, only in the supposedly right way. I don't believe in it for a second. But what you saw, and I suppose that this is also ties into the death of the classical tradition, that a lot of composers who were previously thought to be obscure have now been recorded. And two of Bach's sons, C.P.E. Bach, his oldest son, and Johann Christian Bach, his youngest son. And I love both of them, but there wasn't very much music by them, either of them, available until the 1970. Philip Daniel says, hot take, Cherubini is as great as Beethoven. I have recordings of Raymond Lepard conducting Cherubini. Thomas Tallis, Ralph Vaughan Williams. Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot out there. The late quartets are moving, says Isaiah Selassie. Yes, indeed, they are. No, there's lots of room. There's lots of room there. Philip Daniel says, Alex Ross hates high modernism like Schoenberg. It's too challenging for his itty-bitty whittled brain. And again, Fidelio isn't even a true opera. It's a Singspiel. Okay, what is the best recording of the Dvorak Ninth? What, there must be, 150 different ones? I don't know. Whatever the first one I bought, I still love buying Deutsche gramophone records because they were so beautifully presented. They were also, they were German pressings, just like the Philips were Dutch pressings, and the North American pressings, like for Angel Records, the EMI records released in America, they were just terrible, absolutely terrible. It's quite expensive, though. The second movement of Beethoven's Emperor Concerto is sublime, says Visionary Companion. Am I benighted Middlebrow for saying that? No, I just, it's not, again, I suppose Beethoven was very influential in this regard as well, that the piano concerto changed with him. Previously, in Mozart and Haydn, you see the piano as kind of almost an obligato piece. But with Beethoven, it's a titanic struggle between piano and orchestra, and that is not my cup of tea. Philip Daniel says, I guess I should stop composing because I'm too pale and male and oppress others merely by existing. Yeah, I don't know how much longer this can go on for. Oh, white people are horrible. White people, it's, it's rent seeking is what it is. And you have people like Alex Ross trying to get involved in it as well. Walrus Libertarian says, was the dumbing down of the West intentional, or did they just pander to the lowest common denominator? I think it was intentional to a certain degree. That no, we don't want to be elitist, particularly after the horrors of the Second World War, where supposedly, all the SS officers went home, and played on the gramophone Schubert piano sonatas and the like. But it's the inversion of values, again, from our Hungarian friend, that no, if this is supposed to be good and this is supposed to be not so good and this is supposed to be trash, then we want to flip that on its head. And in this regard, I think that immigration has it's been enormously influential, because immigrants, by and large, are simply not interested in Western high culture. There's some exceptions, but it's not their thing. It's not their thing. And of course, multiculturalism means that we can't say, no, our music is better than your music. We're not allowed to say that anymore. Brandon Smith says, listening to Dvorak's Ninth, 45 minutes plus, so far reminds me of Warner Brothers cartoons. Visionary Companion again, in movies, the evil genius villain always listens to Bach. Wasn't it Hannibal Lecter was listening to Goldberg's in the first movie? Well, Manhunter was the first one with Anthony Hopkins in it. Dionysius says, do intellectuals still meet up at salons? I don't think so. I shouldn't think so, I guess they don't meet up with anybody anymore because of the Rona. And, okay, I think I'm going to wrap it up a little early today. As I say, I'm not completely recovered. And I'll just mention that we're having an election in British Columbia, provincial election, and one parliament cannot bind another parliament. So we have these fixed term election laws in Canada, and they're absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So the Premier of British Columbia, we have a minority government where it is the doom coalition of the New Democratic Party and the Greens. Things have come to a pretty pass whenever the Greens get involved. And so the Premier, John Horgan, says that we have to have an election now 1 year early because of COVID-19, that this is going to last another year, he says. How does he know that this is going to last another year? Yeah. So that's just, the whole thing is completely silly. And then you have the Liberal leader saying, "Oh, this is cynical and this is outrageous excuse for an election." Well, for fixed term laws, parties won when they thought they called elections when they thought they could win. The polling looks good, say they got a good issue. Sometimes it backfired on them, but that's how it worked. So let's talk about what's coming up culture-wise on Theater Thursday. I'm going to be talking about Yasujiro Ozu's Good Morning from 1959. October the 1st, I'm going to be talking about Albert Brooks's 1981 comedy Modern Romance. 2 films from 2020 coming up. October 8th, Bill and Ted Face the Music. October 15th, I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Charlie Kaufman. And on October 22nd, Werner Herzog's remake of one of the greatest films ever made, Nosferatu, with Klaus Kinski. And in the book club, on September 25th, The Culture of Narcissism by Christopher Lasch. On October the 2nd, Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington. And October 9th, Archie and Mehetabel by Don Marquis. On October 16th, Democracy, the God That Failed by Hans Hermann Hoppe. And on October 23rd, a memoir of the Spanish Civil War from the nationalist side, Mine Were of Trouble by Peter Kemp. So I'm going to be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, and it should be a full-length show. I should be fully recovered by then, God willing. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to donate to this live stream, which would be exceedingly useful at this time, my PayPal account is Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send me money via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I will leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.